All right, welcome to this explainer. So picture this. You walk into a crowded room, and immediately your eyes are drawn to the center of attention, right? I mean, we're totally conditioned to notice the loudest, most animated people holding court. But what if I told you we've been paying attention to the entirely wrong people this whole time? Today, we are diving deep into the true, hidden psychological power of the silent observer. We're going to pull back the curtain on the mechanics of deep thinkers, the trend resistors, and the quiet minds. And as you'll see, their silence is absolutely not a weakness. It is actually a highly potent, finely tuned psychological weapon. Okay, I want you to really listen to this. Don't fear the loudest voice. Fear the one who watches, thinks, and understands the room. Just let that sink in for a second. When the loudest person is talking, well, they're basically showing you exactly who they are and all the cards they hold. But the one who's just watching, their hand is completely hidden. So, today we're going to break down exactly what is happening behind that quiet exterior and why you should absolutely be paying very close attention to it. Which brings us to Section 1, the deception of volume. All right, let's confront a massive societal blind spot. We live in a world that completely falsely equates being loud and constantly seeking attention with power and leadership. But psychology paints a totally different picture. Just think about the stark contrast in where mental energy is actually being spent here. Over in the loud room, folks are constantly reacting. They're chasing public approval, seeking social proof, and basically fighting for attention just to feel confident. Now, compare that to the quiet mind. These individuals are anchored by incredible emotional control. Instead of reacting, they're processing. Instead of seeking attention, they're observing. And here's the real kicker. Their confidence comes from internal validation. They don't need likes or outside approval to feel strong because their decisions are driven by their own internal standards, not whatever the crowd is doing. Moving right along to Section 2, Masters of Observation. So because quiet people aren't burning through all their physical and mental energy just talking and performing, their minds are freed up. They literally transform into high-powered surveillance systems. While the loudest person in the room is panicking about what they're going to say next, the quiet observer is quietly acquiring data. They're catching all those subtle shifts in body language. They're hearing those tiny micro-changes in vocal tone that give away a person's actual mood. They're spotting hidden behavior patterns and mapping out all the unspoken dynamics of the room. Essentially, they see the stuff that literally everyone else totally misses. And in any social or professional setting, that knowledge translates directly into power. Now, let's look at the science of how they actually process all this data. Because it's not just about noticing things, it's what they do with that info. Deep processors use a framework psychologists call associative integration. That's basically the ability to link concepts from totally unrelated areas. It lets them see these invisible bridges between ideas that seem completely unconnected to the average thinker. It's exactly why their advice often feels so surprisingly wise, right? And below that, we've got counterfactual thinking. Instead of just accepting things at face value, their brains naturally run what-if scenarios. They're constantly imagining alternative outcomes and predicting consequences way before they even happen. Honestly, it's like they're playing chess while the rest of the room is playing checkers. Doing all this complex mental modeling requires a very specific operational speed. Let's look at Section 3, the slow thinking advantage. Deep thinkers operate with something psychologists call System 2 dominance. This means they absolutely do not rely on fast, automatic emotional reactions. Quite the opposite. They have this profound psychological ability to just pause, analyze, and reflect on information. And this slow, deliberate approach, it makes them significantly calmer, vastly more strategic, and incredibly difficult to manipulate. They don't rush decisions, they refine them. You literally never know exactly what they're thinking. And honestly, that kind of unpredictability is deeply intimidating to a lot of people. But to maintain this System 2 dominance, they need something absolutely essential: cognitive quiet. Now, you might see a quiet person and think, oh, they're isolated or they're so shy, but that is a massive misunderstanding. They actively seek out solitude because too much noise, drama, and constant stimulation just completely overwhelms their processing depth. Giving them silence isn't isolating them. It's giving their brain the exact environment it needs to reach its absolute sharpest state. For them, solitude literally equals clarity. This unique internal wiring creates an almost impenetrable shield, which brings us to Section 4, immunity to the crowd. Think about how trends spread in our society.
Mostly it's driven by fear. Psychologists call it normative social influence. It's that intense pressure to conform just because you're terrified of being left out or judged by the group. We've all been there, right? Average people succumb to this pressure all the time. But quiet, deep thinking individuals, they are incredibly trend resistant. Since they have such a strong, stable sense of their own identity, they don't feel lost when the winds change. They are totally fine standing completely alone because they evaluate the world based on what makes sense to them, not just what happens to be popular on any given Tuesday. Just look at how deliberately they allocate their mental energy. Trying to keep up with trends and constantly fighting for the spotlight, that takes an exhausting amount of attention. But these trend-independent folks are fiercely selective with their mental reserves. Notice how they invest heavily, like 60%, in personal values, usefulness, and long-term function, and they save the rest for analyzing their surroundings. They literally just ignore short-term public approval. They protect their mental energy like it's their most valuable asset, because, well, to them, it absolutely is. Okay, now we're getting to the most tactical part of this explainer. Section 5, the weaponization of silence. I want you to really think about this for a second. Why does silence make average people so incredibly uncomfortable? Seriously, have you ever been in a conversation where the other person just stops talking? Or maybe you're trapped in an elevator with a total stranger, and the silence is so loud it almost physically hurts? For most people, it triggers this state of mild panic. They get this overwhelming, almost compulsive urge to just fill the void with words.
And you know what? That panic is exactly what the quiet mind leverages. It's essentially a 3-step protocol for gathering critical intelligence. Step 1, maintain total silence. Step 2, let the other person panic and start over-talking. And step 3, simply observe as they share way too much and expose their real intentions. While the other person is desperately rambling to fill the quiet air, the silent observer is staying perfectly calm. They just listen and they learn absolutely everything about the person in front of them, all without ever showing their own hand. It is, frankly, a brilliant and effortless strategy.
But what happens when they finally do decide to speak? That brings us to Section 6, the final strike. We've seen how they observe, how they process, and how they let other people expose themselves. Now, let's talk about how they use their voice. When they speak, it's backed by what psychologists call high self-reflective capacity. Basically, quiet people question their own thinking way more than anyone else does. They are constantly reviewing their choices, revisiting their old beliefs, and updating their view of the world. Because of this profound emotional maturity and self-awareness, whatever they say is heavily vetted before it ever leaves their mouth. Literally, not a single word is ever wasted. And that brings us to the power of just one. Because they speak so rarely and because their words are backed by such intense observation and deep processing, what they say carries massive, undeniable weight. It doesn't happen all the time, but it frequently takes just one perfectly timed, highly intentional sentence from the quietest person in the room to completely shift the entire power dynamic of a conversation. Everyone stops, everyone listens. And that, right there, is the ultimate power of speaking with pure intention. So we've spent this explainer unraveling the hidden architecture of the silent observer. You now know for a fact that their quietness is definitely not a lack of anything. It's actually a profound abundance of observation, processing, and emotional control. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Next time you step into a crowded, noisy room and the loudest voices start fighting for your attention, who will you be watching?